Welcome to Pixel Pizza,
Did she say pizza?
your ultimate source for chiptunes, video game talk, and pepperoni. Delivered to you from Los Angeles and into the digital cyberspace of the 2020s.
Pizza power!
That's right, when super giant pizza.
I want a large, thick crust with double cheese, ham, pepperoni. Hey, where's my pizza? Pizza time.
Welcome back to the Pixel Pizza Podcast, listeners. You just heard from our chiptune artist this week, Siberia Zero. And that track you heard was called Spittin' Daggers. So, hope you like that one. Now we are here with our interview guest for the show. This guest was recently named as part of Forbes' 30 Under 30 Europe for 2024. He was a quest designer on Cyberpunk 2077 and most recently, game director for Enotria, The Last Song. This is Stoyan Stoyanov. How are you doing, Stoyan?
Hey, awesome. Great. It's Halloween spooky season.
Yeah.
So it's
Do you have any
exciting
big
time.
plans?
Actually, yes. I think it's the first year I'm gonna dress up in 5 years.
Oh, wow. What are you dressing as?
I'm gonna do Ghetto, and my girlfriend's gonna be Gojo from Jujutsu Kaisen.
Oh,
The
that's
anime.
fun. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
my friend is doing a character from that too.
Yeah. So you get to see me without a beard. This happens once in a decade.
That's
I
right.
look,
Yeah, I was surprised. Because when I was looking you up, you always had the beard, so.
oh yeah, this is the commitment to the outfit.
Good. So, we like to get started by asking, Stoyan, when in your life did you know you wanted to work in games?
Oh, I think it was late high school. I know a lot of people in the game industry know this fairly early, or at least dream about it.
Mm.
Um, but I didn't. So when I was a kid, my interests were quite varied. So when I was growing up, I was actually more into sciences. Initially, stuff like biology, and then I moved on to physics and math. Though mostly physics, to be honest, math was horribly boring for me. Um, and it was only in late high school when I got more into games and then started thinking, hey, all this interesting problem solving that appeals to me in science, it might be even more fun with games. And that's when I applied um, to Abertay University, where I studied, which is in Scotland. And it was the only games university I applied to. Everything else was programming or physics.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was, how to say, it was a long shot. And I think maybe the fact that I wasn't somebody who was obsessed with the idea of a career in games gave me a fresh perspective. And then once I got into the field, I ended up really falling in love with it. Because I think there is a lot of overlap, especially on the technical side. I think this is why a lot of the original like old dogs in the industry, like Valve and so on, you will find a lot of computer science engineers or physicists there, because games are like the fun version of science. It's like you get to do all the technical stuff, but you make a wizard shoot a fireball instead of having to write like research papers all day.
Yeah. No, I know a lot of people who went into games from very different backgrounds. Some people who were studying architecture or in medical sciences. So I think, yeah, the schools are often interested when it's people from completely different backgrounds.
Yeah, I think also games as a background didn't exist, right? Like
Mm.
Abertay, where I studied, it's a pretty new university and there's not that many games courses. So I think only now are you getting the first waves of people who actually graduated a games course working
Yeah.
in games, right? It wasn't a thing.
And yeah, then I know you worked on some mobile games after that. How did you get there from being a student?
Um, so what ended up happening is when I was doing my games course, I was already feeling a bit uncertain about it. Let's say
Mm.
my parents were not very happy with this choice. To them,
Hmm.
I was like wasting my potential, right? Like I was meant to be like a great physicist or whatever, and then suddenly I'm doing this course they've never heard of. They didn't believe in games since they're not a thing in Bulgaria, where I'm from. And it was also a Bachelor of Arts, which for somebody coming from a science background was also like, oh, great, I'm an art major now.
Yeah.
And I just didn't have a lot of confidence that my degree would give me enough, right? Because it was such a new thing. Um, and so halfway through university, I decided I'm going to make an effort to get a job in the industry, whatever it might be, just to get some practical experience. And that's how I ended up at Outplay, which is this. Sorry, my camera's moving around everywhere. This
All
like
good.
fancy AI thing that like tracks me, and it's
Oh
maybe a
yeah.
little bit too aggressive. And basically, what happened is I got into this mobile games company as a entry level QA engineer, right? So I was just doing quality assurance and testing, and it was pretty cool. So for the second half of my university degree, I was working and studying full time, which I don't recommend to anyone.
Mm.
It was not very fun, but it did give me a lot of experience, and it's part of the reason why I then got the job at CDPR when I graduated, because I graduated with over 2 years experience.
Yeah, I guess you were getting like two different kinds of experience simultaneously.
Yeah, exactly. I cannot overstate for anyone who wants to get into the game industry, which is extra tricky right now, because of the entire situation
Of
with
course. Yeah.
questionable financial decisions and layoffs.
Hmm.
Um, Portfolio and practical experience are worth so much more than any kind of like theoretical knowledge, because you can learn a lot on the job, but you need to go through the process of making a game, I think, to understand it. And in a way, mobile games are pretty good at that because they're very rapid. The thing with mobile game development is you tend to make a lot of games very fast. So you go through the entire cycle and you have very big audiences. So like when we were working on mobile games, um, we would have like hundreds of thousands of players. So if you
Wow.
made a change, you got like immediate feedback of all the analytics. So I think even though in the end I wasn't a huge fan of the mobile games part of the industry, I think it was an amazing place to start because it just teaches you so much so fast, as opposed to like if you work on a big AAA, you could spend like 7 years working on the same project and it never comes out.
Yeah. But yeah, then you went to CDPR and you were a quest designer there. And I was curious, how did you sort of build up a background in that?
Um, so I did not have much of a background. I think it was a mix of um, luck and opportunity, let's say. At the time, it was actually my dream job because I was a huge fan of the Cyberpunk IP, and
Mm.
I'm a huge fan of Cyberpunk in general. It's the
Yeah.
genre, and so I had a lot of knowledge on all the classic books and the setting, etc. Um, and then when I applied, what helped me was that CDPR was very open to hiring people with less experience but more hands-on. Like for example, a lot of quest designers were actually successful modders.
Oh.
So like, and I think this worked out well for them because they knew that, for example, a modder might not have a official degree or experience in that sense, but they've made and released the thing that people liked. So they're very good at like being practical, and they're also very crafty, right? Like modders are used to taking stuff that isn't theirs and figuring out how it works and turning it into something new. And
Right.
this is a skill that's very useful in game development because it means you're very they used to make this comparison, which was pretty funny to me. It was a little bit extreme, but it was like the kind of they used to say that it's not about the people that know a lot, it's about the kind of people you could drop into the jungle with a knife and know that they're going to figure something out.
Hmm.
So it was about like resourcefulness basically, and because of this they had a very elaborate test, so you had to make actually a playable thing. Because I've applied to a bunch of jobs now, and a lot of them focus on theoreticals. It's basically questions that you answer or a document that you create. But CDPR also wanted you to make a playable thing. You could pick a mod
Oh.
kit of your choosing, and you had to, of course, I can't go into too much detail because a lot of this stuff is NDA'd and so on.
Uh,
But they essentially wanted you to just make a playable thing. And that was really cool because it was a way to demonstrate, like, hey, I can make a game. And yeah, I just put my heart and soul into it basically, and they gave me a shot because they also needed more people. There were not a lot of quest designers. It was a very responsible role because you were kind of like a content owner, and they would usually only hire more experienced people. So it was like the first time that they were hiring juniors. So I just managed to sneak in. The one funny thing is, in a different universe, I would have probably worked at Rockstar or Ubisoft because initially when I applied to CDPR, I was so excited that I got to the test stage and so on. I submitted my test. I had to work like evenings and weekends because I was still working and studying. So,
mm,
um, and then I got rejected and I was completely crushed because, in my head, I was, oh no, like I tried so hard. This was my dream job. I've been fantasizing about it. And then basically like a week and a half later, when I was just about to accept a different offer, they called me and they told me that they got the application wrong. Like they mixed me up with somebody else.
oh,
So so it was a pretty big roller coaster for me at the time. And yeah, and the rest is history. So they basically just gave me a shot. They gave me a chance to prove myself with the test, and I'm really glad for that because a lot of companies just stop you at early stages if you don't have the experience.
yeah. No, that's what a whirlwind of a story. That's amazing. You were saying a bit that, it was a lot of responsibility for someone to take on. So, how did you manage that? How did you come to grips with that in the sort of onboarding process?
I think it was just that the people there were so good. Like the thing with Cyberpunk was at the time it was one of the biggest projects in the industry, right? So
Mhm.
a lot of people from all over the world had come to CDPR because they wanted to work on this high profile game. And as a result, the concentration of talent was crazy. So for me, as somebody new, all I had to do was basically just shut up and listen, just pay
Mhm.
attention to what everybody's doing, and everybody was really kind and helpful, which wasn't necessarily my experience before in the industry.
Mm.
Um, like one thing I very quickly discovered, I think it applies to all creative industries, but the more talented and capable somebody is, the more humble and helpful they tend to be.
Mm.
So I found out that like people that would be like struggling or uncertain in their abilities would be more like guarded and reserved and would even like be unwilling to share their like tricks of the trade or whatever. Whereas
Oh.
in CDPR and like other places where there were all these incredibly talented people, they were so eager and happy to teach you or to tell you things and to explain stuff. And this helped me grow super fast. I think it really accelerated my learning because you're just around all these amazing people,
Mhm.
and they're always there, ready to help you out.
Yeah, no, you reminded me I had a couple years ago, I had Ryan, the cinematics director, uh, on the show and for Cyberpunk. And he was, so open with talking about his process. And even at the end, he was like, yeah, if your listeners have any questions for me, they should reach out on LinkedIn. And I was like, wow, that's so personal and nice.
Yeah, yeah. I found that a lot of people in the industry tend to be like this. In recent years, I started going to more events and doing lectures and talks, and because of this, I got to meet some of the industry veterans, names that I used to hear about when I was a kid. And all of them have been so humble and down
Mm.
to earth, right? Like I got to meet Warren Spector,
Oh.
and some of my favorite games were all the old immersive sim, like whether it was like Thief or Deus Ex. Um, and he was just such a humble guy. Like you would never guess who he is because he would just, no matter if it was like a student or a random person, he was always happy to stop and give them the time of day and talk them through stuff. And um, yeah, I think it's just because this industry is young. So thankfully, we don't have like much of a star factor.
Right.
If that makes sense. We don't have like a famous writer or a famous actor. Games people are only well known within the industry, and I think maybe this also helps with everything feeling a lot more genuine. Like people just want to make cool stuff.
Right, yeah, and in other industries they've been around so long that like the big famous heroes are generations ago. And so I
Yeah.
as far as those resources they're not so much there. So, but yeah, like pretty much everybody in games who's left a big impact is still around and imparting that wisdom.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy if you think about it, how
Mhm.
quickly it developed. It you can talk to the people that were there in like the early days
Yeah.
of I don't know, colored graphics coming. We're going from like 8-bit to 16-bit, and now we're doing path tracing and all sorts of crazy stuff.
Exactly, it's mind-blowing. So you were talking about inspirations a bit earlier. I wanted to know, what do you think makes a great quest line?
Um, engaging with you. A great quest line is basically a playable version of an interesting question, right? It's like something that makes you go, and it makes you think about how would you answer it, right? Um, and I'm making this distinction because I think it's different than what makes a great story. I think there are a lot of great stories in games that are very linear, but they take the form more of like a traditional narrative, like a movie, right? And those are amazing, but they don't engage with you in the same active way that a game truly can, because they can give you an interesting narrative, but you're more passive. Whereas a great quest line to me involves the element of choice and decisions. So it is truly a thing of like, what would I do in this, I don't know, gray moral situation, or um, giving you the opportunity to role play. Like maybe you're going to be the hero 1 minute, or maybe you want to be the villain this time, or you want to pretend to be a detective, which is like a common trope in games because it's just
Hmm.
really easy to be a detective in a game. It perfectly fits with like how people tend to play. And the other thing is, of course, we're not talking about necessarily like what to say. It's not a difficult question. It's not like you have to solve a complicated math equation or something. In fact, usually the best quests are very simple, but they're very emotionally charged. Like, I don't know, do you save um, a young couple or a baby?
Hmm.
This it's a simple question, but depending on how it's framed or how you think about stuff, things can get really complex very fast.
Yeah.
Um, and I think on the flip side, you could say that like a bad quest is something that just leaves you kind of detached.
Mm.
It's like, kill 5 rats or like whatever,
Yeah.
things that you don't really care about and you're just going through the motions. That's just filler. And one of the things that CDPR always had as a rule, which I really appreciated, is they had a lot of, well, they had a few hard rules, but one of them was no fetch quests.
Mm.
We were not allowed to ever make a fetch quest, which was pretty funny.
I love that. Yeah, I think what struck me about Cyberpunk is that the quests always felt like they were a window into a different character in this world. And it expanded Night City and like what the life was like there and the crime scene and everything so much.
Yeah, exactly. And this is one of the ways that is the reason why when people talk about quests in games like Witcher or Cyberpunk or even like, let's say, Baldur's Gate
Hmm.
3, um, why the side quests feel so impactful, whereas in other games they can feel like throwaways. There's a very clear distinction in some games between like the main story content and the other stuff. And the other stuff is usually like low budget, not very interesting.
Yeah.
reused assets. The reason is that all the quests in the games that I mentioned, um, as you said, they connect to a character in the world. They explore an interesting moral question about what it's like to live in this world, or they have like a very strong emotional core. Like, let's say they're really funny quests or they're really sad quests, and so on. And this makes them all feel meaningful. Like you don't feel like any quest is just there for the sake of it. And it's because in the very origin of creating these quests, and I've spoken to some Larian guys and they have a pretty similar process. So I think it's the same.
Yeah.
Basically, every quest has to justify its existence. Like no quest is there just because we can do it. It always has to have something to say about the world. As you said, like either reveals something new that the player might not have known, it goes deeper into an aspect, or it's very engaging in terms of like tone or characters involved.
For sure. And then your next project was Dying Light 2, which I know is very different in terms of the role you had on it, where it was more sort of technical and combat focused. And I was wondering what it was like working on something that where you were more involved with like the gameplay centric as opposed to the narrative.
So it was very interesting, though I must clarify. So when I joined Techland, I worked on their announced, but they haven't said much about it. They're doing this like fantasy RPG.
Oh, okay.
And basically, I supported Dying Light 2, but that game was in the final stages, right? So I didn't really have creative input. At that point, it was more about helping it through the finish line. But it was really fascinating for me because I always had an interest in games from a more holistic point of view. So because my background was technical and I love telling stories, right? So
Yeah.
I don't mind these things, but I was always interested in how you can tell cool stories with the full toolkit of a game, which includes the gameplay. I was never a huge fan of super story-centric games, whether, people have many names for them, whether it's like a walking sim or even like an amazing game such as The Last of Us, let's say, which is
Sure.
phenomenal. And I actually love that game. But to me, it's more of a traditional narrative. So with Dying Light, it was cool to be in a studio that's more gameplay oriented, because if you compare it to CDPR, CDPR would focus on the gameplay, of course, but you could clearly tell the focus was the story and the quests, right? Nobody plays Witcher because of the combat. Whereas in Dying Light, the combat and the traversal were actually the main draw of the game. And it helped me to learn a lot about creating really engaging combat systems, especially melee combat and traversal. And I still think, even though Dying Light 2 maybe took some steps back compared to the original game, overall, I still think it's one of the best melee and first-person traversal systems out there. They did some really cool stuff, and I learned a lot of lessons from them.
Yeah, the parkour system that they sort of pioneered in that game was so cool.
Yeah, there's even little stuff that later on informed about a lot of how I think about designing systems. And I will talk about it in lectures and talks. And one of the things that I hate is what I call letting the player fall asleep at the wheel. So it's an approach in design where, as you're making the system and you're playtesting it with people, either you input read or you just straight up have a camera that's looking at their hands, and you have a graph that like compares how exciting is what's happening on the screen versus what the player is doing with their hands.
Oh.
So falling asleep at the wheel is basically when, I don't know, there's like super cool stuff happening on the screen, but the player is just pushing forward on the stick and they're pressing like A every 10 seconds, And this is a problem that I think a lot of modern games have. Because of the bigger audience, they've tried to simplify stuff to the point that the inputs are so automated and basic that you lose a lot of the engagement. Because all the cool stuff is happening on screen. You're not actually doing anything cool. And Dying Light had a really cool blend of stuff where it was still a mainstream game that's pretty easy, But for example, they had an interesting approach to, let's say, upgrades, right? In a lot of games, when you become better at something, it's automatic. Like, let's say you get the upgrade for extra movement speed, and then you're just straight up faster, right? You
Yeah.
don't have to do anything with it. Whereas in Dying Light, every time you unlocked a meaningful skill, you still had to input something. So let's say you would unlock the ability to roll to avoid fall damage. It still meant that when you were falling, you had to press crouch to then roll. Or you unlock boosting when you're swinging from bars. So then every time you would swing from a bar, you had to press space at the correct moment to give yourself that boost. And all of these things were very easy to do. It was almost impossible to fail the timing. But as a player, it made you feel part of the experience. Like you're not just automatically getting better, but you're unlocking new abilities to engage, new ways to engage with the game. And I don't know, it just makes the parkour so much more engaging because at the high level, when you have all the upgrades, you're also using more buttons and doing more complex things. You're not just automatically better at it, but you're still, I don't know, holding forward and doing nothing else.
Totally. That was something I always really appreciate about Insomniac's games, is if like every button on the controller is being used for something practical.
Yeah, and I think especially looking at these large mainstream AAAs is very cool because, of course, there's a lot of crazy indies that do this kind of
Oh,
stuff.
of course.
And a lot of Japanese companies that just generally don't care what the standard is. They're just going to do their own thing.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, a lot of them have been very successful, like From Software, who are
Oh,
like
yeah.
masters of really weird control schemes that are barely functional, but they somehow make it work. Whereas from the big AAAs, I think, yeah, you're right. Insomniac, and also I would say Ghost of Tsushima, even
Oh,
though I was
yeah.
not a super fan of the game on some levels. It was just super engaging to play, even though it was so simple, because it just demanded your attention, right? They did so many smart things with how you had to change the stances and parry things in the correct moment, and it always made you feel really cool because you were always doing stuff.
Right. Yeah, and it was coming from you.
Mhm.
So, you were talking a bit earlier about how the art of problem solving is what really drew you to games. And so, how would you say you sort of approach a new problem in development when it's something that you feel like is overwhelming you or confusing you?
So there's several ways. It depends on where the difficulty is coming from, but like if I'm having a creative block, let's say, like if the problem is that I just cannot come up with the solution, uh, a lot of people brainstorm and they do mind maps and whatever. But for me, I actually like going at it the other way. How do I explain? If you have like a blank space creatively, um, brainstorming is like exploding in all directions.
Hmm.
Whereas instead, what I like is constricting the boundaries. So I usually start to come up with limitations for myself, and I make the limitations more and more extreme until I've created a box small enough for myself that it becomes a lot easier to mm, fit inside. I think a lot of times the human mind struggles when you give it a completely blank canvas. This is why like every writer's nightmare is like a blank page, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you tell them, okay, the publisher wants you to write like a 200-page book that's about the Second World War, except, I don't know, the Axis or lizards or whatever, then they can immediately start writing. Um, and I think it's the same with problems. Sometimes you have to limit yourself, and it can sound really horrible to a lot of creative people because it sounds like, okay, I'm just picking arbitrary limitations, and what if the best idea is outside of these confines that I just picked? But usually it tends to be the other way around. You end up creating better work under these limits. And if for some reason you really see that whatever limitations you gave yourself are ruining the heart of it, then you have your answer, right? Like now you know that whatever you wanted to do was outside of them. And the other approach is more pragmatic, which is I will sometimes just look at how to say reality like let's say I'm trying to design a combat system. I might also give myself some limitations in terms of what the team can achieve. So I might go like, okay, this is our budget. These are the people in the team. I might talk to them, see what they like, see what they don't like, maybe try and get a feel for what their strengths and weaknesses are, and then be like, okay, what is realistically a really cool thing that this team in this moment with the resources that we have can create.
Mm.
And again, this to a lot of creative people, this can sound horrible because it sounds like you're trying to, I don't know, standardize creativity, right?
Mm-hmm.
But to me, it's the other way around. It's when you are more realistic, you tend to create much cooler stuff because people can work at their peak instead of being like, okay, we have a bunch of people that have done melee combat systems, but now we're going to make a racing game in an engine they've never touched in a programming language they don't know, right? So you're probably going to make a really bad racing game, no matter how cool your idea was.
Right,
Yeah.
but yeah, if you have them work on a combat game, if it's with a different team and with a different prompt, it's like it's still going to be a really damn good creative combat game.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the other thing is when people think about making games, especially people from outside the industry, they focus a lot on the ideas. This is a really funny thing for me because a lot of times, if let's say I meet somebody, I don't know, I'm talking to a taxi driver, somebody in a queue, like these kind of random encounters,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes you share what you do, and a lot of people are really excited about the idea of somebody who makes games, and a lot of them will start sharing their own ideas of their dream game, right?
Mm.
And sometimes they're going to be super secretive about it, as if you're going to, it's like such a good idea. They don't want people to know. And this is a funny misconception because it's not that ideas are not worth anything, but like 99% of what makes a game good is the execution. The idea, I don't want to say it's irrelevant, but, you know, like what is so cool and original about Baldur's Gate 3? On paper, really nothing. I mean, it's just an iteration of Divinity Original Sin 2, but in the Baldur's Gate setting, and yet it's incredible. And it's incredible because they executed on it very well. You could give a different team the same idea, like, hey, make a game that's like Divinity Original Sin 2, but in the Baldur's Gate setting, and that game could be horrible. Because the idea ultimately doesn't determine that much. There are some games where, of course, the idea is super brilliant, like a small indie game or something, but for larger games, it's so much more about the execution than the idea. And the execution depends on the team and the skill set they have.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it like that, but I can totally see that. So getting into Enotria, I was wondering, when in the process did you come on that project?
So I initially came on as a consultant, and then eventually became a director on the project. I came in during, I would say, early production. So the project had already passed like pre-production and they were like in the early stages, but let's say there was a lot of turmoil and shifts, right? Like compared to the project when I joined, almost every single aspect was redone in some way. Like by the end, we had changed the engine, we had redone most of the core systems, we had made significant changes to the art style. Most of the game was redesigned. Pretty much the only thing that remained unchanged was kind of the lore and the setting, because that stuff was more based on Italian like history and folklore. So it was quite early on. Like I kind of came in the midst of it. I think when I joined, the team thought they were deep in production, but they were actually in the beginning. They had no idea how much we're going to have to change until we finish the game.
Yeah. I know also in your spare time you love to travel. Did you get to go to Italy at all for inspiration and things?
I spent a lot of time in Milan, since that is where the physical office is of the studio. So I work remote, so I'm in Krakow right now, in Poland, where I live. But I did go to Milan a lot. Obviously, it's not exactly, it's a work trip. You tend to spend most of the time at the office.
Sure.
But I did get a chance to go around the area. So I would do sometimes weekend trips from Milan to all the surrounding towns because there's a lot in that area, right? Like you could go north to Lake Como, or you could go to Venice, or you could go to Turin, etc. And Italy is really cool. I mean, it's always been one of my favorite countries, and it was great to have an excuse to explore more. But yeah, I wish I had. Maybe if I joined in pre-production, I could have had the excuse of going to a Sardinian beach
Hmm.
and calling it research, but
Yeah.
I was too late.
Too bad. But I do think what's cool is that it felt like, in some ways, a full circle moment for you because you had the experience with, the lore and storytelling, and you had the experience with the combat. And this, at least from my perspective, is a game where those things are so entwined with the whole mask system. And yeah, how did you sort of integrate those things together?
Yeah, so for me, it was a really cool challenge for several reasons. Um, but the main one was that all of these theories I had, now I had the chance to test them, right?
Mm,
Because in a large studio, you have very limited influence, obviously, since it's a huge corporation and mm, you own a very small piece of the puzzle.
sure.
Uh, Whereas in an indie project, you can be a lot braver and you can experiment a lot more. And especially with this game, it was pretty tough, right? Because we had the majority of the team was super inexperienced. They were basically fresh out of university. We had a few senior people in leadership roles, but very few. Italy did not have much of a game industry, so there wasn't really like how to say like a wealth of knowledge and experience that we could pull from, or a
Oh,
talent pool. And also, a Souls like is a really hard thing to make. I think Souls games are one of the most complex genres right now, definitely in the mainstream.
mm,
Since a lot of people underestimate that, like From Software is making Souls games, but they've been doing it for over 20 years, and they have all those systems and experience that they've built up. And those games are incredibly complex. Like they have so many more systems than any other AAA. Like it makes something like God of War Ragnarok look like a crayon drawing, right?
mm.
Just in terms of like, Elden Ring is insane. They have four separate systems that govern how you block an attack. Um, so it's very daunting trying to deconstruct that, understand it, see which pieces are essential and which aren't. Because of course we could not do all of it. It was
Right.
impossible. And on top of that, even if we could, we wouldn't want to because we wanted to do our own twist on the genre, right? Um, and I think one of the cool things was, as you said, it was very tied into this game is like a love letter to Italy, right? So even on
Yeah.
the gameplay front, I wanted to make sure that this is a game where the different elements fit together. They don't feel separate. This is the reason why, let's say, masks are a very important piece of equipment. They're a key part of the gameplay core loop, but they're also a central point in the narrative and in the world and in the aesthetics. So all of these things come together in a way that a lot of big games don't necessarily, right?
Hmm.
Like there's a lot of games where who you are in the cutscene and who you are when you're playing is a completely different thing. And this game was an opportunity to try and make something that's more interconnected. And I think in that sense, it was a success and it was a pretty interesting product. And of course, we also had more leeway because our ambitions were lower. This was not a game where we were expecting to, I don't know, win Game of the Year awards or something. This is the first game from a brand new studio and experienced team. Um, so our target was to make a game that we were proud of, and as a result, we were under less, let's say, creative and financial pressure, so we could be a little bit crazier with our ideas.
Yeah, I definitely hear a lot about companies having sort of internal metrics for what reviews the game should get or how many it should sell. as they're developing it.
Yeah, I've never been a huge fan of that,
Mm-hmm.
especially because when you talk about reviews, one of the things that really bothers me is the over reliance on things like Metacritic or even
Yeah.
OpenCritic. Because nowadays, despite all the flaws of it, I think a much more accurate estimate of how good a game is even something like Steam user reviews
Yeah.
and sales numbers, or even like Twitch
Oh, yeah, I was just
reception.
thinking that.
Because you see all these games that are like incredibly well critically reviewed and they completely flop and they don't connect with people. And then on the flip side, you get games that are panned, but people love them. Um, and for me, it was like at the end of the day, you're making games for players, right? Not for reviewers.
Yeah.
So if a game has like a 95 on Metacritic, but nobody plays it or likes it, what's the point? And I think it's a trap because certain things tend to review much better compared to how much people care about them.
Mm.
So, for example, a lot of games that review really well have really high production quality and a lot of like cinematic content, whereas people tend to become quite desensitized by such stuff, right? Like at this point, people are seeing so many games with amazing graphics, cool cutscenes, and so on that it just doesn't impress them anymore.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of big studios are really focusing on that stuff because they know it reviews well, right? It's much easier to get over an 80 on Metacritic with a game that has gorgeous cutscenes. No matter how bad the story is and uninteresting the characters are, or like whatever else,
Right.
than if you make a really crazy gameplay game that just doesn't look that good. So our metrics were a bit more realistic in that sense. We weren't focusing so much on reviews and stuff like this. And even with sales, of course, the target was to be profitable.
Of course.
And beyond that, yeah.
Any other big lessons that you learned on the project?
Maybe one of them was that we could have been a bit more realistic, perhaps. I found out that as a designer, it's so easy to shoot for the moon, right? To have all these crazy ideas and want to execute them. Whereas in the end, you will make a much better game if you are less ambitious, but you do it much better.
Mm.
And this is a really hard pill to swallow if you're a creative person.
Yeah.
Because it's like, why would I limit how cool the game could be? I think most creative people would much rather have like a super crazy, creative, cool game that is really broken and doesn't work that well. Whereas players want the opposite. Like they would much rather have something that's safer but executes well. Actually, one point of comparison I have on this is a game that to me is the perfect reflection of this, which is Lies of P.
Oh.
And Lies of P was really well received by the players. And I remember when it came out internally in the studio, because it was kind of a competition of ours, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even though it was in a different price bracket. We were quite shocked, right? Because we were avid Souls players, and to us, the game was so bland because it was borrowing so many of the mechanics, it wasn't doing much new, and it was very, very safe. It was extremely safe and derivative. But what we found is that it was executed so exceptionally well that that's what people loved about it. They didn't mind that the game was not, I don't know, super crazy, innovative, and bold. They just love the fact that they have a game that looks great, runs great, and feels great. And I think if I could wind back the clock, like I might have made our game slightly less ambitious and slightly more polished. And I think it would have ended up being a better game. But that's a hard lesson. I think it's really hard to willingly go, this game, I'm gonna make this game less interesting. Just so it's more polished. It's a really tough thing to choose.
Yeah, and I imagine it would be very hard to sort of narrow down what ideas and concepts you need to cut for that to happen.
Yeah, exactly. I think especially in the case of the studio, another thing was since people were fresh out of uni, this was their first project ever.
Mm-hmm.
They had no basis of comparison when it comes to how difficult something might be to do or how long it's going to take them. Because they were doing these things for the first time ever, right? So this made estimating certain things very tricky. And I also made some mistakes in the sense that from experience with working with senior people, I would estimate a certain task that I thought was relatively easy because I had worked obviously with like AAA veterans who could do this in a week.
Hmm.
But then I realized, no, actually, this takes like a month because they need to learn everything about how to execute this specific task, right?
Right.
Um, but I think we all learned a lot of lessons, and in the end, the team really grew in terms of experience. So I think whatever comes next will be a leap above in terms of polish and execution.
That's great. That's very exciting.
In regards to the future, what the studio could do or the people at it, I think games have a really particular thing about them compared to other creative mediums.
Mhm.
Generally, a sequel is a worrying thing. So if there's like a sequel to a beloved book or a movie, it's a really difficult thing, right? Like it's very rare that you can just make a better version of it. Whereas in games, I almost feel like it's the opposite. Like a well-executed sequel is an attempt to take all the things that worked from the first game and clean things up. And like a lot of times when you think on great games, it is the sequel where things really took off. And it might not even be the direct sequel. I mean, sequel is in like a sequel in terms of process and aspirations. For example, like when you look at From Software games, Dark Souls is not a sequel to Demon Souls, but it is basically, right? Like it's spiritually the same kind of game.
Yeah.
And you could see the giant leap they made from their first attempt at that kind of game to their second one. And that's one of the reasons why it exploded. Whereas like if they never made the second game, it would have been such a loss and people never would have known that it was possible, right? The same as like other recent examples I can give is like Remnant 2 versus Remnant 1. These are like the Souls shooters.
Oh.
The first Remnant was like a decent multiplayer game whose selling point was that it's basically Dark Souls with guns, right? And then the sequel is one of the best multiplayer games of all time, just
Wow.
because they just iterated on it so well. And even a lot of games that people have no idea. I promise this is the last thing I'm going to say, but
No.
there is one of the anecdotes that I love saying is there's Rocket League, which is one of the most successful like casual multiplayer games of all time, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of people don't know that same studio did basically the same game years before, and it was called Super Powered Rocket Battle Cars or something, but a really weird name. And it was essentially Rocket League, but it was a really ugly, janky, unrefined version of it. But they still believed that the idea had potential. So instead, they focused on other games in the meantime to develop their experience. And then they made Rocket League.
Oh.
And we never would have had Rocket League if they had just given up. The reason why Rocket League is so good is because they made that game years before. It critically flopped. Like it was a 5 out of 10 game.
Wow.
It's almost no players, but they still believed in the idea. And then they decided, okay, we're going to acquire the experience. We're going to get better at making games. And then we're going to try again. And then they made Rocket League. And I think a lot of people, when they see amazing games, they're missing that first step. But it's so crucial. And I think this is one of the things that makes the game industry quite cool to work in, because it's such a mix of technical and creative.
Yeah.
That making a sequel is actually a really cool thing, as opposed to like, if you have to make a sequel to a book and you're forced to do it, it's really not that exciting. And it's probably going to be worse than the original. Whereas in games, it's so exciting to be able to truly execute on the vision. And this is also why I think it's quite heartbreaking to see all the layoffs and the other stuff happening in the industry. Because making a good sequel is the people, right? Like games aren't made by a studio. Like it's not the label that's on the building that makes the game. It's the people. And one of the worst things about layoffs and things that people will feel years from now is you lose a lot of this talent. And a lot of the best studios and the best games are so good because the same people stuck around to make several similar games and eventually make something great. It's the same reason why Larian is good, or From Software is good, or Nintendo is good. Like these are studios that have senior talent that has been there for many years and have amassed a lot of knowledge on a specific type of game and genre. And when you lay off people and when you have a lot of turnover, it might be good for the bottom line or the company. But creatively, it's like a reset. It's like shooting yourself in the foot, right? Like, even if the game is called a sequel, you're basically starting over from scratch. Um, so I think that's one of the saddest things for me, is the knowledge that so many games and teams are going to be set back years, right? Like to restore this level of experience, it takes like 5 to 10 years
Mm.
to recreate this culture. So yeah, my one hope is that it's going to result in a lot of really cool small teams and indie projects.
Yeah,
So let's
it
see.
seems to be so far. But
Mhm.
yeah, it's like if if you make something good and then you lose the team, they never have a chance to make something great.
Yeah, exactly. It's just so sad to see people, yeah, reset and starting over.
Mm.
Um, and even sometimes it's just financial reasons. There's a lot of great games that just now the market is so oversaturated that a lot of games just sink. Like they just don't pick up the traction. Like recently, there was the Ubisoft team that was responsible for the side-scrolling Prince of Persia game, the new one.
Yeah,
They got like reassigned to different teams. Like that was really heartbreaking because
it
that was one
was.
of the best Metroidvanias of all time. It was an
Oh, for sure.
exceptional game, one of the best games Ubisoft has made in the last 10 years. And it wasn't released on Steam and a bunch of other market reasons. And in the end, it just didn't sell well. And that team is not going to make a sequel, right? Now
Yeah.
they're like spread apart, and it's one of the tricky things nowadays with games. There's just so many of them coming out that it's no longer enough to make a good game to be financially viable.
Yeah, so many factors. Uh so yeah, not to change the tone too much, but
Mhm.
this is the Pixel Pizza podcast. I have to ask, Stoyan Stoyanov, where is your favorite pizza place?
Huh, my favorite. It's interesting because I can tell you where the best pizza I've had
Mm,
is. I don't know if it's my favorite, but probably it is. And it's funny because it's not a fancy place.
mm,
Because of course, spending time in Italy, I learned a lot about pizza from different regions and a lot
sure.
of like specific things and a lot of crazy experiences. But the best one I had was actually at this local place that was in the outskirts of Milan that one of my coworkers took me to. And it was really funny because it's like the most unimpressive place you can imagine. It's like this little mom and pop sort of thing that's nestled between a car wash and some generic like auto parts
Hmm.
shop. Um, but yeah, they had by far the best pizza I've ever had. So I would say that place, wherever it is, I don't remember its name. I just remember how it made me feel, and
Mm,
it was by far the best pizza I've ever had.
great. Do you remember, was there anything on it? Was it made a specific way that you liked?
It was the freshness of the ingredients.
Mm.
Like it was a Neapolitan pizza, and the people running it were from the south.
Oh.
But it was just they had incredible ingredients that they were sourcing. Some of them locally, but some of them they had shipped from the south of Italy. So everything was just so fresh, and they were using a lot of the. There's certain types of cheese that are just so much better if they're fresh and
Mm.
natural,
Oh, for
like
sure.
bufala and like different ones where you cut into them, they like spill out. I think that's like the one main thing coming from Bulgaria, which is also in the south of Europe. Um, it's not that the cuisine is something super crazy; it's just the quality of the ingredients. Like you could make the same recipe somewhere else and it wouldn't be nearly as good
Yeah.
because it's all about yeah. It's one of the coolest things about Italy. They
Hmm.
care so much about food and ingredients that everything is at super high level.
So yeah, thank you so much for joining me today, Stoyan.
Of course, it was a pleasure. And it's really cool to be invited to one of these things and to talk about my career, because generally you tend to talk more about projects or design.
Yeah,
So it's almost interesting to, even for me, to experience a retrospective of of my path, right? Because people don't tend to look back.
that's
So it's funny
true.
to even have to think about it.
Yeah, full self-reflection.
Exactly. And I think I will also take a little bit of inspiration from Ryan, in the sense that if anyone wants to reach out, especially if they're interested in being a designer or writer or anything adjacent in the game industry, I would be more than happy to offer feedback and support. I've done mentorship in the past and sort of helped people make their first step, because it's quite scary right now.
Mm-hmm.
So if anyone wants to reach out, I will be available through LinkedIn, email, my website, wherever, whenever.
Great. Then I'll provide those links in the description of the podcast.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we're gonna head off, and we will hear from Siberia Zero again, our chiptune artist, and the track you're going to be hearing is called The Uncurse. So hope you enjoy that one. We will see you next week with another new Pixel Pizza.